Okay, last week, because it was kind of a mixed up week and all, talked about things involving Easter and the Passion Week, so to speak. And I talked about some evidences of if Jesus was crucified on Thursday or Friday, you know, things of that nature. A couple things. Number one, I asked a question myself, I guess of myself, because I was talking about the lunar calendar, how that the first day of the month was the new moon, and then you would have 7 days to the quarter, and by the 14th, 15th, you'd have a full moon, and that's when Passover would occur in the first, what they would call their first month of the year. And we were talking about that the chief priest celebrated Passover, it seems like, on Thursday night, and Jesus and his apostles celebrated it on Wednesday night. Oh, my question was, why would they do that if, you know, the first day of the month, you know, and you've got 14 days, and it's always on the 15th of Nisan, or the 14th, 15th of Nisan, their first month. And it's trying to do it from the top of my head. You know, the answers are very simple. It's because they were on a lunar calendar, but the times and the seasons are on a solar calendar. So spring, we know it's always on March 20th, right? Because that's when the spring equinox is. But that doesn't mean it's going to be on the first day of the week. It could be any day of the week, right?
March 20th can.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you translate out with the lunar calendar to a solar calendar, actually, if you take 28 days, you'd have 13 months in a year, plus a couple days left over to compensate for that solar calendar. So it's the same thing with us that, say, the 4th of July is not always on the same day of the week. It can be on a different day of the week. So that explains the question that I had. It's just the first day of the month, you know, is always on a particular day of the week because it changes, all right? So we're going to look at the biblical historical chronology of the Passion Week, because my second, I guess my first argument about Jesus being crucified on Thursday comes from, if you put the events of that week together, if he's crucified on Friday, you've got a day missing. So what I want to do is kind of explain that. And to do that, I've got a chart. Believe it or not, I took some extra time, since I didn't have two sermons to preach last week. I've got one done for this morning, so I went ahead and did this work. And I call it the biblical historical chronology of the Passion Week. Let me get this up there so that I'm okay. Now, we understand this is the Jewish Passover, is when the crucifixion of Jesus takes place. But it happens within the framework of a week, and this is what the biblical passages tell us. Okay, and this is, I hope you'll see as we go down through this, what I'm talking about. Notice up here I have timing. Okay, and this is from the scripture. John chapter 12 verse 1 talks about 6 days before the Passover. That would be on Saturday, our Saturday. It's their seventh day, or the Sabbath day, and because it's the Sabbath day, it's Sabbath until what time?
6 p.m.
6 p.m. But remember, John is writing somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 years after the crucifixion of Jesus. And he's probably not using the typical sundown to sundown system. He might be talking more about the system that, because at this point in time, 40 years later, the church has gone from being predominantly Jewish, ethnic Jewish Christians, to being predominantly ethnic Gentile Christians. You can find that in the book of Revelation, in Revelation chapter 7, with 144,000. And then, after that, the great multitude. Okay? So, he's talking about 6 days before Passover. Jesus is in Bethany. Okay? And then when he's at Bethany, again, it's Sabbath until 6 p.m., but there's supper at Simon's house. Now, if we were doing it a little different, if we were doing it in the Jewish aspect of sunset to sunset, I'd be putting the supper at Simon's house down here on Sunday. But John says it's the next Sunday is the next day. The next day after what? The next day after this supper at Simon's house. This is where Mary anoints Jesus for his burial. Judas gets all upset. Why is she wasting this? This could have been sold, the money given to the poor. Okay? There's your scriptural references for those events. Now, when we come to these events over here, they're not in order necessarily. They're not all of the events, but they're the major things that are happening on those particular days. Okay. Do you understand my point about why this is 6 days before Passover, why John is saying it the way he says it? This is probably Saturday evening after sundown, which essentially it's going to be the first day, but they're not counting it as the first day then, because he's going to come down in John chapter 12, verse 12 and say the next day. Have I confused you thoroughly? Okay. But this is how the interactions between, and you'll see a footnote down there on the last page where it talks about the two different sundown, why the Sadducees and the chief priests would celebrate on Thursday evening, and Jesus would celebrate Passover on Wednesday evening. There are different scriptures that they would follow. Okay? So they were just doing, it's kind of like, well, we've got a biblical basis for what we're doing. Again, I would accept Jesus, what he's doing, as what was right. Theirs is being wrong, but you know what John does? When John's talking about it, he's just telling you the way it is. He's talking about the reality of it. Jesus celebrated it on what we would call Thursday night, but our Wednesday night, and they did it on Friday night, which was what we would call Thursday night. Yeah, I know. Okay?
It's still confusing.
It's confusing. But once you put them all together, it kind of blends in and you begin to understand it. So the scripture references, there's what's happening. These 6 days before Passover. You can study these later on. I just want to give you the glimpse of it.
The weather people today actually go by, I guess, something different from what, but on the when they say the low for the day, it's actually for the last
morning.
day.
Well, it's after midnight.
Yeah, the next
No, they
morning.
don't go by that. Not on what I see. It don't go that it changes at midnight. It goes. In other words, like Thursday, it goes to midnight, but the low for that day, they've got it on Anyway, it's a day off on the Lowe's.
Okay.
And so I was just, I mean, I just been noticing that the last couple of weeks. And
I can accept that.
well, well, it confused me because I was getting ready for the freeze on my plants that I put out, and it was the next day. And
Next
so-
day.
But I thought the day went from midnight to midnight.
Maybe they're
That
not.
ain't the way they do it.
I know when they talk about the low for tonight, like the low for tonight, today,
Right.
they're talking about what it's gonna be in the morning when you
Yeah.
wake up.
Right. It's tomorrow.
It's tomorrow morning.
Yeah, and see, that's
I never
Okay.
thought about it, I just figured.
So what does that note say on number 1? What do I have there? I should have brought mine.
Sabbath day regulations on travel meant Jesus must have arrived in Bethany on Friday, the 6th day of the previous week.
Okay. So he comes Friday, they celebrate the Passover, or not Passover, the Sabbath Friday night to Saturday evening, all right? Saturday evening, then that's their 7th day. So you can see why I'm saying this supper, if we were doing it the way that, if we were doing it sunset to sunset, we'd actually have that on Sunday. But that's not the way John is doing it in his recording of it, again, up to 40 years later. All right, so the next day, you see that in John chapter 12, verse 12? You got your Bibles there? John chapter 12, verse 12. The next day, what does he do? He starts into Jerusalem, right? And people know that he's coming. And they call this, the scholars call it, you see it in your Bibles, the triumphal entry. This is where Palm Sunday comes from, okay? And some make a big deal out of Palm Sunday. It's just the Sunday before the Passover, before the Crucifixion. All right, but this is the first day of the week then. You have triumphal entry. You have Jesus weeping over Jerusalem as he comes into town. And then entering into the temple. Now, this is important. He enters into the temple, he goes in and he looks around and he comes back out, and then he returns to Bethany. And that's in probably John chapter 12, verse 19 would be the verse telling you he returns to Bethany. So that tells you right there what happened on that Sunday, the first day of the week. All right? The next day. Now the next day is in Matthew 21:18 and Mark 11:12. You look at those and you'll see that phrase is there, the next day. So that's Monday, and that's what would be their second day of the week. Well, what happens then? Well, you have the cursing of the fig tree. Let me get my paper here so I can read what that note, what I put down for this note. John 12:32 records a previous cleansing at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. Okay. So when we're talking about Matthew 28:18 through 22, John doesn't talk about Jesus cleansing the temple at the time of Passover. He talks about it in John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry. So biblical scholars have fought for years. Well, see, it's anachronistic. It's one of these is out of place. Did he cleanse it at the beginning? Did he cleanse it, on the in the Passion Week, we call it? Okay. Well, the obvious answer is he did it twice. He did it once at the beginning of his ministry, and then they begin asking him, who are you to do this? He does it again in this final week. By what authority do you do these things? So you have the questions on his authority that will come on the next page. So you have cursing of the fig tree. Remember, he comes to the fig tree, it's early in the morning. Fig tree has leaves, okay? It's early, it shouldn't have figs, but it shouldn't have leaves either, because the figs come out before the leaves. He sees the leaves, he goes over there, and there are no figs, so he curses the tree, and he goes into the city, and he cleanses the temple. And now you've got your footnote 3, or yeah, footnote 3, Matthew 26:2. You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming. After how many days? 2 days. The Passover is coming. So this is on Monday, as he's cleansing the temple, he's talking about this stuff. After 2 days. Do you count Monday, Tuesday? Or do you go Tuesday, Wednesday, and Passover is it's Monday, okay, after 2 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, well, he's crucified on Friday. Where's that extra day? You'd have to say after 3 days, if it's on Friday in the sense of Thursday evening. Following me? Okay. And I don't know why I put it over there at the cleansing of the temple. Wednesday was the first day of unleavened bread and preparation day. That's what Jesus practiced. So, anyway, and what I have there is the 2 days were today and tomorrow. Wednesday being the preparation day, but it would also work out the day after the preparation day if you're taking Tuesday and Wednesday, and then Thursday would be Passover, and that would be the day that Jesus was crucified on. There's a voice from heaven. That's recorded in Luke 19:45. Well, I won't say Luke 49, Luke 19. Again, those aren't necessarily in order. But then John chapter 12, verse 20, you get down to about verse 50, down to the end of that. And what you have is, remember, he cursed the fig tree, right? He goes into town, into Jerusalem, he cleanses the temple, and the voice from heaven happens, and there are discussions going on, but they go back out to Bethany, and they pass that fig tree, and the disciples say, or the apostles say, look, the fig tree, it's withered already. Okay. Now, when he did that, that was figurative of that the temple and the Jewish nation was supposed to be producing fruit. But they were leaves, all show and no fruit. Okay? So he curses it, but that evening when they come back through, it's withered. And that's after Jesus has cleansed the temple. That's kind of saying, all right, Judaism's done. It's over. There's no hope for it. Okay, do you have questions on this? Let's go to
That's the next page right there.
yeah, there's where I gotta go. Okay, so with this one, the next marker point is Mark 11:27. They came again to Jerusalem. So what is the logic in that? He came on Monday, right? Oh, he came in on Sunday, triumphal entry. The next day he comes into Jerusalem, all right? They came in again to Jerusalem. The logic is it's the next day, right? So this would make it Tuesday, the third day. And there you have the reference points for it. And what happens? What are some of the events that happen on this day? His authority is questioned. Again, he drove out the money changers, did all that stuff, cleansed the temple on Monday. The next day, the chief priests and the Sanhedrin people, the big shots are coming in. What gives you the right to do this? Okay, so he answers a bunch of questions. Then he's teaching in the temple, and that's when it comes to the three questions. Remember, they're trying to trap him. So the first question is about taxes, isn't it? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? And Jesus says, render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. The second question is about the resurrection. A woman marries a man, he dies, they have no children. One of his brothers marries her to raise up seed, they have no children, he dies, up to where she has 7, right? 7 of these brothers, the last one dies, childless. In the resurrection, whose wife is she? Because she's had these 7 as wife here on earth. That's when Jesus says it's not like that in the resurrection. There's not going to be male or female, right? So they didn't know the scriptures and they didn't know the power of God. So you have, then the third question is, which is the great commandment, or the greatest of the commandments? Love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, with all thy mind. And the second one's like it, and love thy neighbor as thyself. Then he leaves Jerusalem and he goes out to the Mount of Olives and delivers what's called the Olivet Discourse, where he's teaching his disciples on that day. All right. Got to get that picture? All right. Then, from Mark 14:12 and Luke 22:7, the first day of unleavened bread, which is 2 days after Monday, or it's on the second day after Monday. You're going to have Tuesday and Wednesday and then Passover. So Wednesday has to be the first day of unleavened bread, which is the preparation day. Okay? This will be the 4th day. There you have your passages you could look at. What happens on this day? Well, this is where his disciples come to him and say, where do you want us to prepare for the Passover feast? Well, why would they prepare for it? It's going to be 2 days later. You prepare for it for that night, right? Or for that day. So he sends the 2 and he tells them, where the upper room's going to be. And they go to do it. Well, what are they doing? Well, apparently they are in Bethany. The 2 go into the city to prepare for the Passover, but they're in Bethany. What are they doing? They're purifying themselves for partaking of the Passover. Which, remember, if you read John's account, then the next day when the chief priests are doing it, they don't want to go into Pilate's house. They want to stand outside and have him come out and talk to them, because that would, they wouldn't be clean then. They'd be unclean for going into a Gentile's house, and they couldn't partake of the Passover. So Thursday becomes preparation day for them.
When they purify themselves, what all will they do?
They probably prayed. They might have had little sacrifices that they would do, not necessarily at the temple, but they would wash themselves. The purifying, the water pots in John chapter 2, the changing the water to wine, the water pots that were there, they had water all over the place because they constantly had to do these things. But they would be watching. They wouldn't touch any unclean thing if at all possible. This is what they would be doing. And yeah, because Jesus being crucified on Thursday, see, the chief priests that morning were planning for that night. Because Passover's already over for Jesus to that degree. The feast is over. Okay. Do you understand? You kind of get a grasp of it. I'm not trying to, I'm just giving you a kind of a blueprint that you can look at and follow and try to understand it. So, that gets us through Wednesday. When would Wednesday stop? Remember, we're dealing with Mark and Luke's account here. 6 o'clock in the evening. What happens at 6 o'clock in the evening? When it was evening. See how that fits right in? When it was evening. So this is Thursday, which is the 5th day, but again, look at, do I have a 5 on there?
Yeah.
I don't have a 5 on mine. I think this is one I had
It
before.
says Passover would be on Thursday, starting at 6 p.m. Wednesday evening per the sundown model, Genesis 1:5 and Exodus 12:18. It seems that the Sanhedrin followed a sunrise to sunrise model, which oddly, they both celebrated Passover on Nisan the 14th through the 24 hours apart.
Yeah, 24 hours apart, but the same day, because of where they started their day.
You would think it would cross over at least, 12 hours. You know what I'm saying, where they would be on the same day, 12 hours of the same day.
Well, but you're skipping 12 hours to start your day, not at 6 o'clock in the evening on Wednesday evening. You're starting your day 6 in the morning the next morning.
I like to
Glad we don't have to
Yes.
figure that stuff out.
Yes, see, that's the key, why they did it that way. All right?
So you're basically saying that one group of people used the sunrise to sunrise, the other group used the sunset to sunset, so that doesn't mean that, if they mixed, it might be Sunday for one group and Monday for the next, for the other group, basically.
Yeah. If we did sunset to sunset, when would we have Sunday evening services?
At 6 in the morning.
Sunday evening services?
Would make it 6 in the morning, yes.
Be in the noon time.
After dark on Saturday night. Our Saturday night.
Is that why the Seventh Adventist does their stuff on Saturday?
Yeah, they do, but they hold to the old Jewish Sabbath. They say the Sabbath law didn't change. Okay, but you see the point then. And again, I'm giving you the chronological order. Okay, when it was evening, what was that? Well, it's the preparation day. They're preparing. So when it was evening, what did they do? They meet in the upper room. What do they do in the upper room? They have the Last Supper, right? John, look at that, John 13:1 through 19:42. This whole deal. But you have the Garden of Gethsemane. That night he is arrested in the morning, and through the morning trials, and then at 9 o'clock he is crucified. That's on Thursday, again, by this. And he's buried by Joseph and Nicodemus, right? And they have to be off the cross in time for everybody to get off the streets, because that's when the chief priests are going to celebrate Passover. Jesus and the two have to be off the crosses for that part of Passover, when they celebrate Passover. Following me? That helps to understand the difference.
So being buried by Joseph and Nicodemus, so did Mary pay them to take him off the cross to do this? Or,
Mary? No. No, Joseph was a disciple, a secret disciple,
Okay.
if you have secret disciples. And so was Nicodemus. Nicodemus brought the spices.
So why didn't
But-
the family take him down off the cross, or they weren't, it could do, because,
They didn't have power
okay.
with the officials. Joseph didn't go to the chief priest. He went to Pilate, I believe. And Pilate gave him permission. So he dies at 3, probably by about 4, it's known he's dead. Joseph comes and gets the body, Nicodemus joins him. They take him to the tomb, they put the spices, they wrap the body, they close the tomb, and they're out of there, and they're back to where they need to be by 6 p.m., which would be the start of Friday, right? Okay, so there you have the Thursday. Then Matthew 27:62. You know what it says? The next day. And this is Friday. What happens on Friday? Oh, that's when they go to Pilate and say, hey, this guy said that he would be raised in 3 days, right? So set a guard. And they set the guard and they sealed the tomb. But notice the language, it's right there. They sealed the tomb for 3 days. Why 3 days?
That's when you start
That's the
reading.
prophecy.
That's the prophecy. But if he was crucified on Thursday and in the grave a little bit of time there on Thursday, why 3 days?
Monday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday.
You don't ever count the first day. Like 3 days from now, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Okay, all right. But there's something more to it also.
Okay, sorry. That's my
Okay.
logic.
I know, I'm trying to give a dramatic, no, for 3 days. Because if he's in the tomb for 3 days, they know he's dead,
Yeah.
okay? And so that would put it on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They'd open it up on, or they'd know on Monday. Yep, he was a fraud, right? He's a fraud. So the guard's there, it's sealed, and then we know the events that happen on Sunday morning. But why the extra to give you 4 days? Remember back in John chapter 11, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, all right? And he was dead for 4 days. And what did Martha say?
It'll be stinking.
Surely he stinks by now. Decomposition has started. It starts about that 3rd day, really, to take place. But they knew and they understood that decomposition aspect of it, but also what they believed was that the spirit hung around for about 3 days, and then after the 3rd day, the spirit went on to where it was going. So for Lazarus, 4 days in the grave, we know he's dead. It's been 4 days and decomposition started. Okay? So with Jesus, there wasn't going to be any decomposition, right? Because that's a prophecy. You will not leave my body in the grave, or his body would not see corruption, and his soul would not be left in Hades, in the Hadean realm. So that gives that extra day. They didn't need it after that. But on Sunday, on the first day of the week then, what happens? Tombs open and all those things. Then, again, the 7th day, that's Saturday, there's no need for anything because the disciples are in hiding and the guard is set, and that's the Romans doing that. There's nothing else to do. Now, Do with this whatever you want to. Okay? And if you find anything wrong with that, let me know. Okay? And I'll make corrections. We'll set the camera up and we'll do it again. But that's why I believe that Jesus was crucified on Thursday rather than Friday.